Ladies and gentlemen, very much an honor to be here as a representative of a carbon-intensive economy. I'm going to talk about the climate change mitigation issues in China. It's not only a challenge, and we also see it an opportunity, in particular an urgency to take actions. And of course, we have all the policies in position. And as you can see, China, we have a lot of number ones in the world, of course, in population number one. And here emission is absolutely number one in the world. Since year 2007, China has been number one, and the trend is continue to increase for a while. As you can see, the United States has been somewhat stabilizing all the time and been reducing for the past few years simply because of the economy being somewhat affected by the financial crisis and also a shift of energy mix from more carbon-intensive coal to less carbon-intensive unconventional natural gases. And of course, the other, like India, so the developing economies may need some time to peak, while the developed economies like the UK and the United States been somewhat stabilized already. This is another indication why the developing economies, although the rate of emission been relatively high already in terms of per capita emissions, China has been something about 50% more than the world average. Is very much close to the EU level already. So in this case, if we look at the income level, it's still very far behind as compared to the developed nations. So this is a good indication to show the relationship between per capita emission of greenhouse gases and per capita income among the major economies in the basic member states and the EU member states. If we look at the industrialization process, China is still at the late stage of industrialization at the national level. Only Beijing and Shanghai are in the post-industrialization stage, and the majority of the provinces are still at the late or even the early stage of industrialization. This would take quite a while, but if we look at the issue from a different perspective, we can see from the tables here, the manufactured products, many of them, China has taken a big share of the world total. Look at steel, and China has been something 40% of the total steel production. And if you look at the mobile production, it's something over 1.1 billion in year 2001. So we can easily see that the Chinese production has reached a level that physical expansion would not be that much any further, and this is one one indication we can gather. And the other is that if we look at from these numbers, we can see a big proportion of these products is not consumed inside China, but went to outside of China for consumption outside of China. And then we look at another challenge, that's urbanization. As you can see the line here, the rural population has been declining all the time since the mid-1990s, and the urban population has been increasing all the time. And by year 2011, 51.3% of the population is in the urban sector already. And if we would say that by 2030, if the urbanization rate is to reach 70%, and then we would need another 20 percentage points of population in the urban sector, that would total something about 300 million, the size of the United States. So this is really a challenge. And this is only part of the story. And the other part of the story is that even, we have the rate of urbanization at 51.3, but still we have some, over 200 million people in the urban sector already, but they are very much marginal. They do not have any entitlement to urban services, so-called rural migrants in urban areas. So this gives us the indication that urbanization is really a long process for China. And in the urban areas, when people have higher income, and then they would like to have some sort of better quality of living, like ownership of automobile vehicles. And the traffic jams in China is really an indication that the Chinese are following the American and the European way of living. And of course, we do have opportunities. One of the opportunities is that China had the growth of the economy has been relatively fast in the past decades, and China is the second largest economy in the world. In that sense, that we would have some capabilities to do a little bit more. But if you look from the other perspective, in terms of per capita terms, and then China is only something ranked around 100 in the world. And another good piece of information is the demographic trend in China. If you look, from the historical records of censuses in China, in the 1950s, we had the first census, and the latest one was conducted in 2010. There are quite a few, very good trends. One is, growth rate of population. In the 1980s, per annum, the rate of population growth was over 2%, and by this century, it's been below 0.5 already. And last year, 2011, the number is only 0.47. So this is a very good trend that the population in China is been stabilizing, and by 2030 or so, Chinese population will start to decline. So this is one, and the other is that if you look at the family size, this might be somewhat not a good sign. The family size has been reducing all the time. In the 1980s, per family size, we would have some 4 people, and now it's only 3 people, a nuclear family, very much typical. So this would give us some indication that the energy consumption and the emission would be really a challenge to be reduced. Mitigation of climate change is not only a challenge, but also an opportunity. In particular, we believe that there is a huge urgency to take actions. One urgency is energy security. In year 1999, total energy consumption was only half of the United States, and by year 2009, total energy consumption in China was more than the Americans, and now it's something 15% more than the United States. And we do not have the resource endowment is very much limited, and we have to rely on huge import of fossil fuels, in particular oil. And in 1993, China was a net exporter of raw oil, and in the year 2011, we imported 268 million tons of raw oil. And this is really a challenge, and we do envisage a huge further increase of car ownership, and energy security really a challenge. And then if we look at the other urgency for taking actions, that's the climate security. On the 27th of July, this year, 2012, a rainstorm in Beijing killed 73 people. And you can see flooding from the media. I don't know if you pay attention to these natural disasters in China, and the flooding and the drought. This are very much typical extreme climate events. So climate security a priority for the Chinese to take actions. Because of these urgencies, and we do believe that mitigation is not simply for climate protection, but more for energy security, for climate security, and for sustainable development inside China. And that is why the Chinese has put forward so ambitious emission reduction targets, and that's in year 2009, the Chinese government announced the targets for 2020. That is 40 to 45% of carbon intensity reduction as compared to year 2005. And this is the highest, in the history of economic development. Nobody has seen such a high percentage reduction in terms of energy intensity and carbon intensity. And this target has been incorporated in the 5-year plans. And if you look at the 12th 5-year plan, this has been disaggregated into provincial levels. And because China is diverse. Some parts are somewhat more advanced, and the others, the inland parts, somewhat less developed. So, the coast areas, they are required to do a little bit more, and the inland provinces, they are expected to do a little bit less. But these are somewhat mandatory. They have to meet these targets. Otherwise, the head of the governor would be removed. So this is very much powerful other administrative measure to implement such policies. And then if you look at the measures and actions and energy efficiency, in China, the small-scale power generation units are simply, phased out. And now all the thermal power generation units, they are super critical, most advanced in the world in terms of per unit kilowatt hour of electricity generated. The amount of coal used is it's the least in the world. And if you look at the automobile sector, for the past 10 years, the standards have been increased from Euro 1 to Euro 4 and Euro 5 in the past decade only. And in terms of renewable energy, the progress has been also very impressive. Wind installed capacity of wind turbine has been #1 in the world. And in terms of solar water heaters, if you go to China, everywhere you can see, on top of the roof, solar heaters. This is sort of, renewable energy. And of course, hydropower. China is the biggest hydropower producer in the world, and also very ambitious plans to cap hydropower in the next 10 or 20 years. And forestation is also everywhere in China. And so this, the sector policies, also at a local government level, we have a lot of initiatives as well. If you look at the low carbon city initiative, we do have, targets very much clearly set for the individual municipalities, and they have the measures identified for energy efficiency, for renewable energy utilization, and also for forest sinks as well. And the Chinese are very much aware that the emissions have been very high already, and the fact is that some of the cities in China, the per capita emission in the urban area is higher than their international counterparts. For instance, in London and Tokyo, per capita emission is something about 5 tons per capita, and in China, Tianjin is something 15 tons per capita already, very much close to the US level. So this is a huge challenge, and that is why action had been taken at the city level. And then we need to come to some of the conclusions, the way forward. We need to have climate compatible development for climate security. This is very much urgent. China has been prone to climate damages, and secondly, we need to transform the energy system for secure energy supply, and this has to be affordable, sustainable, and reliable. And of course, the consumption behavior has to be changed simply because there's no possibility for the Chinese to follow the American way of consumption, even the European way of consumption. So we are very much aware that this sort of consumption behavior cannot sustain. And the other is to integrate environmental protection, low carbon development, and ecological restoration. These have to be to reinforce one another instead of one target without consideration of the other. And finally, China is part of the world. In a globalized world, we have to work with the global community. So that is why China has been so positive in the international negotiations front. And I do hope that for climate change mitigation, if we work together, there must be a solution. Well, thank you very much.